Women Made New. I'm your host, Crystalina Evert. Thank you for joining me. Today, we have a beautiful guest on, Marisa de Lecce. But before we get into it with Marisa, we are going to have a Mindset Minute with Lisa Canning, so stay tuned.
Hey, it's Lisa Canning, your Catholic Mindset Coach, here with a Catholic Mindset Minute. Let's be honest, there are challenging parts to life on this side of heaven. And sometimes I know I can 100% feel like I'm going to crumble when the going gets tough. But even in the most challenging of situations, we have choice. We have agency. We have the ability to use our mind, our ability to appeal to reason, our ability to use our intellect and be renewed. We have a choice about how we think, even in the most challenging of situations. So keep thoughts and scripts in your back pocket that will help you persevere and trust the Lord when life feels messy. Literally, keep these sentences written out on your phone or on a piece of paper in your wallet. So when you are tempted to fall into despair, you have a tool at your fingertips. For more Catholic mindset tips, follow me on Instagram at Lisa Canning.
Welcome to Women Made New. I'm your host, Crystalina Evert. Thank you for joining me. Today, I have a dear friend that I have known for years, and some of you may be familiar with her on the Women Made New television series she was on, but we are going to go back and we are going to just get right into it with Marisa de Lecce. Hello, my dear friend.
Hi, Crystalina. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you agreed to come back on. Now, can you please explain, just tell the women your story and kind of where you're coming from, because I know a lot of women, especially when you're on Women Made New, the television series, the response that we got, and how so many women felt understood with having infertility issues, right? And not wanting to give into the culture and the different means of having a baby, but maybe trusting in God and kind of going the natural way about it. And it really touched the hearts and lives of a lot of people. And so that's why I had you back on, and also just to have a follow-up with you because a lot has happened. So let's go way back and let's start from the beginning and tell us about your story.
Got it. So, the last time I was on this episode, I was somewhat of a newlywed, bright-eyed, and, you're in the honeymoon stage and you have so many high hopes for where you think your marriage is going to lead, how your family is going to grow. And of course, there's this saying that, tell God your plans and he'll laugh. Yeah. And that's really what has happened over the course of my journey. And, it's funny, whenever it comes to God, I've always had this relationship with him in the sense that I've always will be a helpless romantic. And I know that might sound strange to people, but I just feel, especially being a Catholic woman, how can we not be this helpless romantic and always thinking that the impossible is possible? And so I've always kept that mentality with me. And my journey has been long. Giuliano and I will be married actually 6 years this coming October.
Oh, wow. It's been that long already.
It hasn't felt that way. I think, no, it hasn't felt that way, but my skin and my hair, definitely you can tell I've aged in that period of time. But no, it's definitely been a long journey. It's been a beautiful journey. I think that all roses do have thorns, and you need to embrace that rose and embrace your cross, because it does make you a stronger person. And of course, I'm sitting here in retrospect and I'm able to speak a lot more clear and with better composure than probably last year. And I definitely thank God for that grace, because the fertility journey is one that's an extremely emotional one and very personal one. And it's something that I'm sure for those women listening who have suffered the way I have with infertility, you do start to kind of have this projection on yourself that you are insufficient. And that's the devil. I mean, at the end of the day, that's always going to be the devil. He wants you to think that you're not good enough. And one thing that, I really want to tell women is that some of the greatest women in the world were not physical mothers. They were spiritual mothers. I mean, look at Mother Teresa, look at some of the greatest saints that we look up to. And that always really helped me because the women I looked up to, definitely, your mother, your sisters, and the women around you that you respect, a lot of them are mothers. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I would compare myself to them, which isn't always a good thing to do, but I always felt like I was lacking something. And so when I did start to see that there are great women in the world who aren't mothers, that really started to give me peace in a certain respect. I think that I'll admit that I never was, oh my gosh, like I'm so at peace with everything, not being a mother. That was always a very big challenge for me. But there were these little gifts that God would give me that helped me definitely along the way. And so when we first spoke, I was in the journey of trying to conceive. And so I believe at that point, I had just started the Creighton method. And I probably did the Creighton method for a couple of years. And it was definitely something that, it's a wonderful thing because it definitely tracks you and you're able to see when you're ovulating, when you're not ovulating, if there's things that are out of rhythm.
And is that something your husband helped you with, that he was a part of? Is that because some women maybe aren't familiar with that? And if they're trying to learn their cycle and NFP, mm-hmm. especially those maybe engaged, is because they don't want to use contraception within marriage. Yes. Is that something that you do as a couple, or is that solely you as a wife?
It definitely has to be a decision that you make as a couple.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Because it's definitely a commitment. So you do need to be on board with what you decide as a couple. And when they train you on the Creighton model, you sit down with, someone who is verified specialist in the area who can help guide you. So when we did have that meeting, my husband was, of course, part of that. And then with the charting, he was part of it in the beginning, but our journey, again, we'll be married 6 years coming this October. Our journey was definitely one that has been a little bit longer than most. And so there were certain times where then I just started to take over. I didn't feel like he needed to be part of certain things. And yes. We were never trying to avoid pregnancy. And so I feel like if you are using the Creighton method and you are trying to avoid pregnancy, you definitely need your husband very much on board, which I think can also be, I've heard, very beneficial for couples, because it's like, you kind of are like, oh, this is going to be our honeymoon stage right here. And then, we kind of have to abstain here. So having your husband on board for that. But for us, we were always, let's go for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't need to have him as involved as probably other women.
Now, after a while of being married and you kind of realized there was a problem, mm-hmm. and there was something going on. How did you, obviously recognize yes. that you weren't getting pregnant, but how did you realize there was so much more going on with you than just, it seems to be taking a little longer than it should?
Yeah, the difficult part, in all transparency, is I never stopped trying all of my years of marriage. So I know a lot of people say, we stopped trying and then boom, when I stopped thinking about it, I got pregnant. And that did not happen for us. I was always thinking about it. We were always trying. And so for me, it was like, okay, doctors were telling me like, look, we don't know what's wrong with you. And then this doctor would tell me, oh, this is what's wrong with you. And then this doctor. And so it was really difficult for me because I kept getting different answers from different doctors that I very much respected. And so again, in all transparency, it really had me doubt my healthcare, because it's like, you as a woman, I think in general too, and Crystalina, you're really good at this. Like, in your gut, like there's something, when off. Something just seems off, you just know it's off. And so we were constantly being told, okay, this is kind of off. This is kind of off, but no, there's nothing wrong with you. This could be it. This could be it. And it was very, very frustrating because I felt like every 6 months I was trying something new. And so when I say that my mentality, I never stopped trying, there were certain times where like, okay, we weren't doing all the, we weren't going, I wasn't seeing at one point I was seeing a Chinese doctor, a holistic doctor, a naturopathic doctor, a regular doctor. It was crazy. So I did start to tone back on that, but my helpless romantic side, every month I was hopeful that God would give me a miracle. So that's what I mean by, I was never like, oh, it'll just happen. I had never kind of relinquished that, if that makes sense.
Was it hard for you to hear something's wrong with you, like over and over from these different doctors? Because that has to grade, Marisa, on your emotions and your just the state of where you're at mentally and going through this process.
Oh, absolutely.
You feel beat up almost, right?
Well, yeah, you're kind of like, and I'm the type of personality where I've always been able, if I see something I want, I go after it and I get it. And I know I can work
like a
towards
ballistic
that.
missile. It's like
Yeah.
you are ready, armed, loaded, and locked, right?
Yeah, like just let me go. And then when it comes to this, you're like, okay, there's only so much you can do. And at one point I was like, gosh, like I wish I could just be like a camera and go inside and see everything inside my body.
Yeah.
And then just understand what's going on. But it definitely was very challenging having a doctor tell you like, look, there was one point in that this did hurt me. We had been trying, I would say, for a year and a half. And at that point, I did have a doctor tell me like, look, I don't think you'll be able to conceive. Like we don't know really what's wrong with you, but we kind of think it's probably part of your endometriosis.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's part of something else, but altogether, we really just don't know. And we just don't see this happening for you.
How did you handle that when you actually heard those words?
I just, it did sting, and I just was like, okay. And then I was like, okay, next person. Cause like I told you, I just never kind of relinquished that, the will, the desire, I guess you could say. And so in my mind, I respected that individual, a very wonderful doctor, but I was just like, okay, you're wrong. So
wow.
I, in my mind anyways. And so there did come a point where like, obviously again, trying for so long, you don't want to share with people that you're still trying because you do kind of feel like you will be looked at as a crazy person. I know there was a time like my dad even joked with me and he told me, he's like, if anyone told you they could help you get pregnant, like you'll give them $1,000. And that was probably true at a certain point. Like I tried wearing socks on my feet, never letting my feet get cold. Even in the summer, I would only drink warm things, only eat warm things. I went to a Chinese doctor. And like I said, I did acupuncture. I did, there was just so many things I was doing. I tried changing my diet completely, which I do think all of those things ended up, resulting in giving me a pregnancy and having the gift of life. But that journey to get to it, it definitely was kind of like everything kind of coming together, which was, obviously a beautiful thing and a lot of people helping and a lot of prayers. I definitely will never, ever disregard that. I've been very humbled. People I didn't even know, very intimately found out that they were praying for us, for years. And when you start to feel that, you're like, gosh, it really touches your heart.
Now, when you were going through that and almost probably this feeling of desperation, right? Mm-hmm. Of just like trying anything because it was so just ingrained in you, Marisa, ever since I've known you, that you've wanted to be a mom, right?
Yes.
And you've just wanted that life of a wife and a mother, and you knew that was your vocation in life, right? And some people, they go through life and they don't know and they're not sure, but you always knew. Mm-hmm. You always knew. And the thing was, at what point did you kind of surrender all of that? Everything that you did and all the things you just described. And some people are thinking, wow, that's a bit much. But at the same time, it's like you knew in your heart, right? But at what point did you kind of relinquish that and be like, okay, God, I trust in you. This is what faith is all about. How did you embrace those thorns? And what point did you kind of surrender?
Gosh, I remember I had a really, really low point and I was really upset with God.
Yeah.
But it was my birthday and my husband asked me, he's like, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not a huge birthday person. And so I was like, oh, I don't really know. But the next day I went to the mail and I had a letter from a cousin's sister. And so I was looking at anyways, it was my cousin's wife's sister, if that makes sense. And so she had wrote me a letter and she's like, I've been praying for you. I know you've been trying to conceive. And she said, I have been trying to conceive as well for the past 2 years. And we just found out we're expecting. And it wasn't until after we visited the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Wisconsin. She's like, I really feel like you should go there. And so it was just kind of funny because my husband and I had just been talking about what to do for my birthday. And then I received this in the mail. And so I said, okay, we're going. So it was just like, that's like, we're going. This is a sign. And I was like, okay, we're going. So we went to Wisconsin and we went to the shrine and it was a beautiful day. And it kind of felt like God was opening up all these doors for me. And so we got to the shrine. We went in and a gentleman came over to us like, are you so-and-so? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, he's like, you have special permission to to be with the glove of Saint Gianna. Oh, wow. And so, I was like, wow, what a great honor. So we went inside the room and we were praying. And then the gentleman came back in again and we were praying the rosary and he came back in again. And he said, you guys now have permission to open up the casing and you can touch the glove. And he's like, I'll give you complete privacy. And so at that point, then he shuts the door. I'm like, holy smokes, being with this beauty, such a, it's this first class relic. And so, anyway, so my husband and I, we took off our wedding rings and we laid our wedding rings on there. And I had just bought a rosary from the shrine and we put it there. And we were praying, and it really felt like we were supposed to be there, that God wanted us there, all the things. And so, the next day, that was my birthday. And, then the next day was our last day. And, still feeling very hopeful. And on the day that we were flying back home, I started my cycle. And I think that was a very, very low point for me. I remember just being on the floor and I couldn't stop crying. And my poor husband, seeing, your wife like that. And looking back, I'm getting emotional just talking about it. But that was a very, very low point where I kind of was like, God, why would you tease me like this? That's how I felt. It felt like I had been played with. And of course I know that's not what God was doing, but it really felt that way. And so I feel like in that moment, it was a very, very low point for me. And I really just I gave up on myself and on the situation. I just felt, gosh, it's never going to happen. And so that was definitely a very, very low point for me.
How did you get out of that? And did you hear God's voice in your heart? Because we know about that demonic dialogue, right? That we talk about, and that the devil just beats us up and we have a wound and he knows about it. I mean, he will pound us until we that's our way of thinking. And God will always counter that by speaking to us in our heart, in our conscience. And I mean, how did you get yourself out of that? And did you hear that voice, or what were the steps? Because as extreme as all of this does seem, Marisa, for some people, and again, we are talking with Marisa de Lecce here on Women Made New, and she is talking with us about her experiences with her infertility and the beauty of her pregnancy now. And she's just being really raw and honest about her life, and it's beautiful. So how did you get yourself out of that? Because as extreme as all of this seems, again, this is what happens to women behind closed doors, right? And we all go through this in our own way with our own experiences and circumstances and things that we know in our heart that we just long for, that maybe God is saying not right now. And there are these ebbs and flows and these highs and these lows. But the thing is, I want women to know, in that low time of your life, Marisa, if you don't mind sharing, did you hear God's voice, and how did you get out of that, and what did you do? Because some women right now are listening, they're right now.
Yes. And I know what that feels like. It's a very dark desperation. And to be honest, that day when we flew, I did have a book that I had purchased, and I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to message it to you later, but it was basically it's about this Catholic woman, and she's talking about how certain saints in her growth as a woman changed her. And so she's first, Mother Teresa taught her this, and then this saint taught her this, and this saint taught her this. And so it's actually a really cool book. So I was reading the book, and there's a section of it where her and her husband are trying desperately to get pregnant, and they just can't. And so she's just speaking to my heart. It's a really wonderful book, actually. And so she's talking, just, I felt like she was reading my heart. And so that definitely, being able to read a woman share so rawly her feelings, that definitely helped me. But then when I did get home, I will admit, I fell into a very dark depression where I just was very negative. I was in a dark place, and I could feel that I was in a dark place. And to be honest, I felt that way. And I immediately drove to Our Lady of the Rosary and in Little Italy. And I went to a very holy priest there. And I told him, I said, it was Father Louis. And I told him, I know, God bless his soul. But I went to him and I said, I'm in a very dark place. I feel very negative, and I have this anger in me towards God that I know I shouldn't have. And I said, will you please pray over me? And so he prayed over me, and he anointed me, and that gave me a lot of peace. And so that in itself, I feel like really did help me, because I was like, okay, it's going to be okay. And I just have to take a deep breath and take this day by day. And my husband has been a huge support Because I know there's probably, and rightfully so, there's probably men where they're like, okay, look, we've tried for this long, I just want to, let's now live our life. Because it does kind of reach to that point. And my husband was always like, whatever you want, like I'll support you basically. And he was very, very on board, and of course wanted a family as much as I did. And so he was always very, very supportive. And whenever I would get down, he really helped me put things in perspective, where he'd be like, okay, look, like vent and tell me everything that you're so upset about with right now. And I would vent, and he was like, okay, do you have a house? And I'd say, yes. He's like, do you have your health? Yes. Do you have your, and he would go through all these blessings that I have. And then he would say, okay, well, what about, what makes you different from the girl who died in Holocaust? What makes you better or different from her? And that really did put something into my mind where it's like, we're born deserving nothing. And I am no different literally than a little girl that, was murdered, for being a Jew. Like it was just her circumstance that she fell in the timing. And so it really did help me turn my perspective on, stop playing victim to myself, because I realized that there are other women in the world who are 10 times the woman that I am, probably multiply that by 1,000, and they'd be more deserving of anything that I have, but they don't, because that's the situation. And so, and I don't mean that like,
disrespectfully. No.
Yeah. But it's just, I think, there's, and so that really definitely gave me perspective on my situation, and it made me want to be grateful for what I have and thank God for what I do have. So that, my husband's encouragement, and he's a very, very positive person. And that really did help me get through it.
So what is it you did as a couple to kind of help you and stay spiritually strong together?
Yes. So as a couple, we pray the rosary every night. And so that's always something that has been very, very special to me. I grew up praying the rosary with my family every night. And my husband does not come from a strong Catholic family. He was baptized, and but it really was only his mother that was practicing, and none of his siblings are practicing to this day. And so my husband was very much brought up in a very different world and is still learning a lot. But one thing I very much value and admire about my husband is his willingness to want to learn, and at the end of the day, be my partner and support me and grow with me. And so, going to mass together, praying the rosary together, staying close to the sacraments, I think that's something that's very important. And also being able to share your deep, dark, low points with the other person. And of course, the man too does suffer as well. And that was something that I didn't even think about. And, at one point my husband was like, look, like you're suffering so much, but have you ever thought how I feel, in the sense that what he's struggling, like, he's like, I hate seeing you, go through all this. I hate, seeing, you suffer like this. And so I think you really have to be communicative in this process, because if you don't, I really do see how the devil can embed itself in your marriage and really tear you apart. And so I do strongly believe, that infertility journey will bring you closer or further apart. And it's because it's a very emotional process, that it's a very intimate emotional thing that you go through.
Right. And it's kind of like, how are you going to handle this crisis, or how are you going to handle this struggle in your marriage? And also you as a woman going through it, it's beautiful how your antidote wasn't diving into Netflix or drinking or finding some sort of distraction for yourself. You went to God, and you went to God's healer, and priest who can help us spiritually in those dark times. And you knew what to do and where to go. And you listened to that kind of voice in your heart of like, look, this is where we got to go. Spiritually.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day too, my husband, again, he's such a positive person. And he told me, I remember one day I was like, what happens if I can't have children? And I even told him, I said, I feel like you should never have married me. I really got that dark, where I was just like, you shouldn't have married me. You should have married so-and-so.
Yeah.
I was like, you should have married
wait, what?
Yeah. He's like, you would have had so many children. And then he stopped me. And this was actually another like turning point in my mind. He was like, do you really think when I married you because I thought the things I would have with you down the road? He's like, I married you because I loved you then and there for what you are, not for what you will be.
Oh, see,
And,
that's love. Thank you very much. What is your husband's name again? It's hard for me to pronounce it.
Yeah, Giuliano.
Giuliano, props to you, Giuliano, right now, if you're listening. Thank you for being an awesome man of God. You can just tell. So that's amazing.
And I think that's a good thing to recognize, because it's like when you do say your vows, it's like you never know if you will have children. You don't know if you'll have health. And so that person's not marrying you because, what you're going to have down the road, because you might not have that. And so that was one thing. He's like, I married you because he's like, you made me the happiest man on earth. He's like, anything else is a bonus. And that was like, and then he asked me, honestly, he said, do you feel the same for me? And he's like, because obviously I was putting just so much focus and so much energy, trying to find this and figure out this and figure out this. And it really made me like, oh my gosh, who am I becoming to a certain extent?
Wow,
where I felt, for him to have said that to me, it definitely put things in perspective. And at the end of the day, he did say, like, look, if we can't have children, those are the cards that we've been dealt. And those are the cards we have, and we'll play the best hand that we can with them. And that also, knowing that my husband had my back and had that perspective with me. And he told me, he's like, no matter what, we'll have a beautiful life. He said, because that's what God intended for us to have. So he's like, just have faith in that. And he would always tell me, he's like, you have more faith than I do. He's like, where's your faith now? And that did help me a lot too.
Wow, that kind of jolted you and woke you up a little bit, right?
It did. I was like, gosh, like he's, I have more formation in my faith than he does, but it definitely made me feel like, gosh, like you're stronger than I am, if that makes sense.
Wow. Okay, we are here with Marisa de Lecce, and we are going to take a quick break with our friends over at EWTN, and we will be right back, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Women Made New. I'm your host, Crystalina Evert. Thank you for joining me and tuning in. I am here with Marisa de Lecce, and she is just being so raw and honest. And I just love that you're so open. And I know this is going to help a lot of women. Marisa, discussing your issues with infertility and your highs, your lows, and your triumphs in all of this. And can you just give a quick little rundown for people that maybe have just tuned in?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Marisa de Lecce, and I am 35 years old. My husband and I are expecting our first child, a little baby girl, to come this August. We're extremely excited. And it's been a very long journey for us. This coming October, we'll be married 6 years. So it has been, it took us about 5 years to conceive. And I'm just discussing, the honest, the honest, ugly side and beautiful side of the journey of infertility, and how that has affected me, impacted my life, my marriage, and decisions that I've made today.
And even your faith, right? It was tested with some real fire. And I know you were not tempted, mm-hmm. but the offers were always there to mm-hmm. try an unnatural route. Mm-hmm. How did you handle that?
I think that one thing,
because you get desperate enough that it's just like, oh my gosh, why maybe, or why not, or
yeah, you do feel so desperate, and you're just like, golly, like who can help me? And then you have this like shiny beautiful door opening with like rays coming out saying, I'll help you. Mm-hmm. So it is very, very difficult, and you will have people around you saying, well, why don't you just do that, why don't you just do that? And you're like, okay, well, this is also a very personal decision and a very intimate journey. And I think educating yourself on why not to do that. Being, raised and brought up in a very devout Catholic family, I always knew, okay, don't do this, don't do that, but why? And so one thing that I felt was extremely important was understanding what the implications and what were the moral implications of, doing IVF and things of that nature. And so for me, I was just knew, okay, it's bad, but why? And so once you kind of sit down and you look at it, it's like, okay, if you do go down that path, you are playing with life, but also you're playing with lives. And in the sense that what happens a lot of time when women do go through that process is they end up throwing away or discarding embryos, or, or if your child doesn't hit the genetic marker that you want, then it's deemed as, not fit. And then those embryos are discarded, which that is the biggest pushback in the Catholic Church, is that the respect for life isn't there, and also the disregard for it, and also the termination of life. And so if you are truly pro-life and you believe that life happens at conception, then you have to look at that embryo as, this is not just an embryo, this is life. So I think what was the biggest thing for us was understanding, okay, why is this wrong? To again, have more conviction on why you make a decision. And so I really do encourage, even if you are, a Catholic woman that, maybe, you were raised in a devout family, I think it's important to still understand why it is incorrect to pursue that path, and what the implications could have on your soul.
Right. And really being a woman of God. Right.
Yes.
And living that out. It's literally all encompassing. Our faith is not something that we just bring out on Sundays, go to church, check off, and then we put God back in a box for another week, or even in our prayers or whatever. We bring him out, we pray, and then we put him back in a box. Your faith is meant to be all encompassing of the decisions that you make on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. And we live that through the lens of our Catholic faith. We know what it is. We're supposed to know what it is. We have a foundation for it. And I feel like our compass is our guide, our compass of what it is we're doing, and to navigate through this filthy world,
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
as it is right now. And some women, their faith is almost a cafeteria. They pick and choose what they want, especially in times like this when they want something so badly and the world can offer it. But there always is a twist when you take something from the world that it's offering you, right? There's always some sort of a distortion. If it isn't of God, and you aren't going off of that kind of launching pad, it really does get you in trouble. And at the end of the day, as long as we're handling things as women of God on our knees first, and we have that foundation, I think we're okay, because in the end, God wants what's best for us. God wants and knows the plan for your life, the plan for your husband's life, the plan that he had for both of you when he brought you together, and the matter of just trusting and growing. Because wouldn't you say that your faith has grown tremendously through this entire process?
Oh, absolutely. And then now too, that you're having a child, you are now just like, oh my gosh, how can I get this child to heaven? And so that's all you think about. And it's not even, you're like, oh my gosh, like, down to where you live, and, things to that nature. You'll do anything for the salvation of your child's soul.
Absolutely. Now, what I want to get to, which is the fun part, right?
Yeah.
When did you find out, and how did you react, and how did you tell your husband? And oh my goodness, after years and years, Marisa, you're pregnant. How was that experience? Tell me. I'm excited to know.
Yeah. So actually, this is kind of a funny story, but I had reached a point where we had just, I think it was our 4-year anniversary, and it was just golly, we've been trying for so long. And, I kind of told my husband, I'm like, I'm just tired. I said, I'm really tired of, going to these, so many different doctors, and just being poked and prodded and being told so many different things. I said, at what point do we stop? So my husband did say, he's like, look, I haven't given up. He's like, can we just go see one more doctor and just do one more, basically kind of roundup. And from there, if this doesn't work, then we'll stop. And so I said, okay. And so we went to see a doctor, and, of course I go through everything that I've done. I'm like, hey, this is almost too routine now. And so, but then he did do a test that I had never had. And so he basically thinned out my uterus, and it was a surgery, and he thinned out my uterus, and then he went in with a camera to see what my uterus looked like. Cause that was his last thing. He was like, look, this is the last thing I want to check. So when he did go in, he saw that I had a bunch of polyps and adhesions all over my uterus. And so then when he, after the procedure, he's like, look, you have to have this removed laparoscopically. He's like, there's no way you could have ever gotten pregnant having all these adhesions and cysts on your uterus. And this can happen to anybody. It's not like, oh, I had a certain lifestyle or anything. This can happen to anybody. So I had the surgery, and then you have to heal. So, you can't start trying right away. And so then the doctor's like, look, because I had so much, like, I just want to warn you, like, these could grow back in a month. So, I just want to prep you that this could also not work. So like, okay. I'm like, well, what are you going to do? So we were just kind of like getting so much negative, after that. I was like, golly. So my husband was like, okay, well, like, let's try. And so I knew we kind of had this little window right after the surgery of, prime time, I guess you could say. And so I can be a crazy person, I'll admit, especially when it comes to, tracking my hormone levels. So I had purchased HCG strips, which I don't encourage a lot of women to do it because there have been times I have gotten false positives, which really play on your emotions. But anyway, so this time I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to react until I have a really, really strong line. And so it was crazy though, because I knew when I ovulated, and then like 3 days later, I was exhausted and I just felt so different. I was like, there's something happening. Like, I was like, I think I'm pregnant, but I didn't want to say anything to my husband because I didn't want to, get our hopes up. And so then I started peeing on my HCG strips. And so I pee on it in the morning and then at night. And I had this faint little line. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, it's happening. I was like, hey, don't get too excited. So then at night I would check again. It started to get a little darker, a little darker. And so then finally I was like, oh my gosh, I'm for sure pregnant. I was like, I just know I am. And I was starting, which is crazy to,
because the difference how your body feels is the thing. Because you were so in tune with everything.
Oh my gosh. Like I just knew I just knew. And so I hadn't told my husband yet. And my husband's really funny. He has really funny phrases. And so when we first got married, he would always say, so hopefully some people laugh at this, but he would always say, I like my women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Like he would joke, like he would say, that's how he likes his woman, me. And so he'd always joke and say, how we're going to have this huge family. And so I was like, okay, that's how I'm going to tell him. So I went downstairs and I was in the kitchen. I took my shoes off. And so I called him, I was like, Juliana, come here. And so he came over and then he said, what? And I said, where are we? And he said, in the kitchen. And I said, look at my feet. And he goes, you're barefoot. And then he looked at me and I was like, and his eyes got really big. And he's like, and? And I said, I'm pregnant. And then we both just started crying, but I was barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. So that's how I told him.
That's an awesome spin on it though, to be honest. I mean, come on. Because people say, oh, barefoot pregnant in the kitchen, but
it's just such an honor. It's like you're serving, like you get to, like you're making food for your family, you get to feed your family. Like what an honor that is. And then you have life in you. And so for me, I've always just seen it as such a beautiful thing to be able to serve your family and give them nourishment. So I know maybe not everybody thinks of that quote, but I just thought it was such a sweet thing. So anyway, so that's how I told him. And then my husband was really wanted to keep it close to our hearts because again of our journey. And so he originally didn't want to tell people for 3 months. But again, bringing Father Louis into the situation, I would, try to see him like twice a month. I'd go every 2 weeks and bring him soups that I would make. And so that week, right after finding out I was pregnant, I was bringing him soups. And so I was like, oh, well, I won't say anything, even though I wanted to so badly. So I went there, and whenever I'd see him, he always tell me like, oh, you're too thin. You need to eat more pasta. Like, what are you eating? You don't, he would always tell me this.
I know.
And so this was the first time I sit down. He goes, wow, you look really good. And he would never say, he was always the opposite. He's like, you look really healthy. He's like, your face looks really good. And I'm like, golly, I'm feeling great. I'm like, well, thank you, Father Louis. And so I just kept talking to our good friend Kathy, who was in the room. And so then finally he looked at me and he goes, so when's the baby coming? And then I just started crying. He started crying. And I was like, how did you know? And he said, well, you just confirmed it. Yeah, he just knew.
He did.
And so then we ended up telling family on Christmas Eve because my husband wore a fertility tie and is like, look, if your family understands why I'm wearing the fertility tie, we'll tell them. And so one of my sisters, she's like, gosh, nice fertility tie. She said, if only that gosh darn thing worked. And
is that like an Italian thing?
It's actually a Colombian thing. My sister had bought her husband a fertility tie. Actually, when they were dating, they weren't married yet. And so they had 4 children, and my brother-in-law was funny. He was like, we definitely know I don't need this fertility tie anymore.
Yeah.
And so he passed it to my husband, and he had never worn it. And so he wore it on Christmas Eve. And that's when we ended up telling the whole family, we're like, hey, do you like what Juliana's wearing? And then my dad was like, yeah, he looks really nice. I like his coat. And I'm like, well, what about the rest of his outfit? It was just funny. It was like,
like, hello. Nobody wanted to say anything probably at that point with your tradition and everything going on,
Yes,
that's how we told.
And one thing, before time runs up, I I did want to give some tips to women if they would be open to it. And I also did want to tell them some personal things, so that, because I always wanted to know certain things about women and not everyone would share. And so I know that a lot of people say that if you've been on birth control, that you can't, that your ability to conceive is a lot, it diminishes. And that was one thing that really bothered me was I hadn't been on birth control. And so I was like, gosh, like I followed everything that I was taught. I didn't go on birth control. I've, stayed with the teachings of the church. And, I was like, God, like I'm doing this. But then I realized, like, just because I was doing tick for tat. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's not what we're called to do.
Everyone's different. It doesn't matter who you are. We're all going to be different and build differently.
Yes, exactly. And so, I also think it's good to also realize, like, you don't do things because you're going to be getting something. You do it because it's right. And
wow,
so
I like that.
So it's something I wanted to say. And then another thing I wanted to say that a lot of doctors did not, like, honestly, I didn't even receive any of this information probably until like I was in year like 4 of marriage. It's really important. I read the book, The Egg, and it's just basically about understanding how you need to have good egg quality and how you can get good egg quality. And so that's definitely something that in your hands, you can control the quality of your eggs by what you eat, vitamins that you take. It takes about 3 months for that to take effect on your eggs. So I do highly encourage women to also educate themselves on that, because it was never talked about in any of my appointments. And I think that should be something that's very much talked about, because that's something you can control. And if you don't have good egg quality, it will be very difficult for you to get to conceive. And so I think that's something that's very important to understand. And then another thing is also nutrition. Not a lot of doctors will talk about this because they say it's not quote unquote scientifically proven, but I do think that it's, whatever your body's a vessel, and whatever you put into your vessel affects your body. I mean, that's just common sense. And so one thing that I also did was I, started to be very conscious of what I was consuming and what I was eating. And that was a big push also from my husband, was trying an anti-inflammatory diet. And so I do encourage women to really study and understand other resources that are out there. Andrew Huberman, he's a doctor from Stanford. He just did a big podcast about women's fertility. And it really is wonderful, because it talks about like even breathing exercises that you can do, which I started doing towards the end of my journey when I did conceive. At that time, I was doing parasympathetic breathing every morning, which helped put my body in a relaxed state, because I can be definitely, my body's always in fight. And so if your body's always in the stress mode, how can you conceive? Your body wants to be relaxed. And so that was advice given to me by a good friend. And then just good vitamin intake, staying close to your prayer life was also something that was very important. And then nutrition was a huge one. And then I think just always trying to find answers and being your biggest advocate in your healthcare is really important.
Oh, I love that. I think that's wonderful. And also, I'd like to add that before Jason and I got married, I really struggled with serious endometriosis.
Oh, I had that.
I went to Dr. Hilgers,
Yes.
and I think it's naprotechnology, right, that he specialized in.
Yes.
And it turns out I know what you're talking about, Marisa, because I had to have that same exact surgery, and I had benign tumors and the cysts growing that he warned me, I don't know if you're going to be able to get pregnant because it was so severe. But he did go in and do the surgery and remove all of those things. But my goodness, I feel like he opened the well springs of life, because I feel like Jason sneezes, I'm pregnant.
Yeah,
it's been 11 babies later and 2 weeks into marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, it was unbelievable. And that's just what happened for us, and that was my experience.
Oh yeah, endometriosis. I had two laparoscopic surgeries through my journey, and so it definitely. And I know that's not for everyone. I know some women. I think you have to know what you're willing to not willing. That's not a good word, but what you are comfortable with in regards to how much you'll endure in your body in a certain sense, because I think some people I know some people thought I was crazy for doing a second laparoscopic surgery. And so again, it's, you know, what you're capable of and what's good for your marriage. Because I also don't think if I would have had a husband that was like, look, after 2 years of trying, saying, hey, look, like this is just too much, like we need to stop. And if I was like, nope, we're going to keep going, I think that would have been bad for my marriage. So I think you also have to do things that are good for you as a couple and not just look at it as an individual situation, even though it does feel like it's isolating only to you. Which, definitely I felt that. And tips I'll give to women who are fertile in dealing with friends who are infertile is sometimes there's nothing you can say that will help because you have no idea what that pain is like. And even for women, there was one woman so sweet, and she had one child and was really battling and trying to have another, and was talking about how she could relate to me about how difficult it was. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like you have a child. I'm like, if I could just have one. And so I think it's just understanding it's really difficult to give advice or, of course you can always give spiritual advice, but talking from personal experience as a woman who is fertile, talking to someone who's infertile, I think you have to be very careful with what you say. And, I know a tendency also too is just like, oh, why don't you just adopt? You've tried for so long. Why don't you just adopt? And to me, that always really bothered me because adoption's very much a calling and a gift. And that shouldn't be something like, oh, I can't have a child, so my second choice is just going to be adoption. I think adoption's a calling, and you really have to know that that's what God wants from you, because that child chooses you. You don't choose the child, if that makes sense. You're there for the betterment of them, and they will complete your family, not complete your dream, if that makes sense. So I just think for women who are fertile to just be very cognizant of what you say, and to understand that this is a suffering and a very isolating experience, and to have, kindness and compassion. And sometimes you just need to just be there to listen to that person and let them get very low and dark with you, because that will happen, and let them be negative, and let them, be there, and then be good support for when they want to be positive, if that makes sense.
Yes, because women that are going through something and they are feeling those dark emotions, it's nice they know they have a safe place they can go to, because holding that all in and not expressing that and getting it out, and then you're just dealing with that demonic dialogue almost just beating you up. And if you are not talking with someone about it and all of those insecurities and this flood of emotions, that's a hard place to be. And you don't want to go through that on your own. We're not meant to go through these things on our own. And that's precisely why I wanted to do this show, is because some women don't understand at all what you're talking about, and it's so completely foreign. And like me, I have children, and some women out there have many children listening to this, and they don't understand or relate, and they're not going to, because this is a whole different level of where someone else and their own experiences are. And I wanted to really speak to the heart of those women, because I feel like a lot of the time they suffer in silence, and it's not something that is just like a normal conversation that you have with somebody, and you're just like going through this, and you can't really talk to everybody about it. But I wanted them to know that they're understood, they're not alone, and that it's okay. And God has a plan for everybody. Everybody.
He does have a plan. And I think, again, for women who are listening, who have been where I have been, again, to give validation, because I've never heard women say this, but there was a point where I didn't want to be intimate with my husband, because I was like, well, what's the point? Who cares? Like, I got very ugly in that sense. And then I felt ugly. I didn't feel like I was beautiful to be touched. And then I even got to like a dark place where I was like so dark, where I'm like, we're going to die alone. I was like, we're going to have no children to help, who will, surround us with love. We want to have grandchildren. I was like, we'll have no traditions. I got so negative, and I would say these things to my husband. I was like, we're going to be old. And I said, one day I was like, we better make a ton of money, because who's going to care for us when we're old? I was like, I don't want, I was like, who's going to take care of us? And so I got so negative where I would talk like that, which I think I think there's very many women who probably, when you've been trying for 5 years to get pregnant, you do start to think about those things. And then you see, you know, other people having their family and their traditions, and lives revolve around family. They really do. And so, you know, I've been in those dark places. And
what were your conversations with God like in those moments? Or were you even having them?
Oh, I was just upset. I was like, really? I was like, is this what you want from me? I'm like, why did you even put this desire in my heart to be a mother if you knew I couldn't be a mother? You know, I would say these things. And then, you know, then I would really talk to Mary too. And I would say, you know, you know what it's like to be a mother. Like, please advocate for, you know, be an advocate for me in heaven. And, you know, I would, you know, call on the saints, you know, I would, you know, try to storm heaven. I would, you know, I have a very prayerful family, and I would ask them, you know, to pray for me, especially when I had, like, you know, very dark moments, or, you know, you just hit these spots where you start to just, you're not being grateful for what you've been given, and that's the devil. And so you get in these dark spots where you look at everything you won't have instead of looking at everything that you do have.
See, and but you showed up to your fight. We fall and it doesn't feel good. And I get that. And I've been there in a different way in my life with different circumstances. But the fact of the matter is, Marisa, you still got up and you kept going, and you knew it was right, and you knew what needed to be done, and you embraced God's will in your life, and you showed up to your fight, right? And you didn't lay down and die and stay there. You knew what God's will was, and you just kept going. But everybody has those moments. But at the end of the day, you didn't stay down. You got up with the grace of God, and you embraced your life.
Yes. And I think that's what you have to do. And regardless if you end up being able to conceive or not being able to conceive, I do firmly believe that God will give you peace, knowing that that is what your path is. And I firmly believe, because God is going to want what's the best for you, not what's the worst for you. He wants you to have the best life. And so just always bear that in mind, even when it's, you know, those really dark times, that there will be light, and you will be given that peace, and that peace, you know, will be unbreakable. And I think knowing that will really help you also too through the journey.
Right. And they are not alone. Oh, Marisa, thank you so much for being here and so open and having such courage. And courage is contagious. So everyone out there, I just want to give a big thank you, Marisa, to you for having this conversation and being a guest here at Women Made New.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Crystalina. It's always a pleasure.
God bless.
God bless.
I want to thank my guest again, Marisa, for being on with me. And I have some exciting news to announce. I have a pilgrimage that we are going to be going on to France. We are going to be going and seeing all of the different shrines. St. Therese of Lisieux. We're going to go to Mont Saint Michel, which is St. Michael's Castle. And we're going to go down to Lourdes, and we're also going to hit St. Joan of Arc. But if you are interested in doing this with me and you want to heal, you want to reset and start over, go to my Instagram page, and the link is in my bio. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to next weekend with you. God bless.